The snow fell in perfect, postcard-worthy flakes outside our floor-to-ceiling windows, blanketing the Colorado mountainside in pristine white. I stood in our kitchen at 5:30 a.m., already 3 hours into my Christmas morning preparations, watching the sunrise paint the peaks rose gold while my hands worked automatically chopping, seasoning, arranging. The 22-pound prime rib sat perfectly seasoned on the counter, ready for its slow roast. The homemade tortillas I'd spent yesterday evening perfecting were wrapped in warm towels, waiting to accompany the traditional Mexican hot chocolate I'd planned as a cultural bridge between my family and Grayson's. Everything had to be perfect. Not just good perfect. Because today, for the first time in our 10-year marriage, both families would be under one roof for Christmas dinner. My mother, Luz, had finally agreed to fly in from Phoenix, and the Bellamys had graciously accepted our invitation to spend the holiday in Aspen rather than their usual Connecticut estate. I'd been planning this dinner for months, every detail, calculated to finally prove I belonged in their world. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was awake before dawn on Christmas morning, not because of excited children or gift-giving traditions, but because I was terrified of disappointing people who had spent a decade making it clear I wasn't quite good enough. But this morning felt different. This morning, I was going to change everything. I'd hired a photographer, casual, family-style shots that would capture the warmth I'd spent weeks orchestrating. I'd planned a menu that honored both cultures, prime rib with Yorkshire pudding for the Bellamys, but also puzzle rojo and fresh tamales for Mom. The house had been decorated with a combination of elegant silver and gold ornaments alongside papel picado I'd hand-cut myself, creating something that felt authentically me while still meeting Beatrice Bellamy's impossibly high standards. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured myself a cup, adding just a splash of the Mexican vanilla I'd brought back from our honeymoon in Oaxaca. The memory made me smile. Grayson had been so different then, curious about my culture, eager to learn Spanish phrases from my cousins. When had that curiosity turned into tolerance? When had tolerance become thinly veiled embarrassment? I shook off the thought. Today was about moving forward, not dwelling on the subtle ways I'd felt erased over the years. Today was about proving I could be the wife, the daughter-in-law, the woman worthy of the Bellamy name and everything it represented. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Grayson's name appeared on the screen, and my heart did that familiar skip it had been doing for months. Whenever he contacted me, not from love, from anxiety, from the growing certainty that something was wrong, even though he insisted everything was fine. Morning, beautiful. How's the prep going? I typed back quickly, all under control. What time will you be back from your run? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Actually, got pulled into a call with the Tokyo team. This IPO timeline is killing me. Might need to jump on a few more calls throughout the day. My stomach dropped. Grayson, it's Christmas. Both our families are coming. I know, baby. I'll be present for the important parts. Just need to handle a few things. You understand. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar cocktail of disappointment and resignation. Of course I understood. I always understood. Understanding was my specialty, my superpower, my slowly killing me. Of course, I'll handle everything here. You're the best. Love you. I set the phone down without responding, then immediately felt guilty about it. This was exactly the kind of attitude that had created distance between us. He was working toward our future, building something that would benefit both of us. The least I could do was be supportive, but as I began arranging the appetizer platters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been understanding myself into invisibility. Bym. The house hummed with activity. Mom had arrived first, as always, carrying 2 enormous bags of ingredients despite my protests that I had everything handled. She took one look at my perfectly planned menu and immediately began making adjustments. Mija, this is beautiful, she said, surveying the dining room table I'd set with our wedding china. But where are the flowers? And the music? Christmas should feel alive, not like a museum. Within an hour, she'd transformed the space. Bright red poinsettias appeared alongside my elegant white arrangements. The scent of cinnamon and cloves filled the air as she started a pot of caftiala. She'd brought her ancient wooden spoons and began stirring the puzzle, humming Bajo el cello di Mzico under her breath. You're so tense, Elena, she said, catching me reorganizing the same set of napkins for the third time. This is family. Family forgives the burnt tortillas and loves you anyway. The Bellamys aren't that kind of family, Mom. She paused in her stirring, giving me a look that cut straight through my careful composure. Then maybe you should ask yourself why you're trying so hard to impress people who don't know how to love you. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see the unmistakable silhouette of Beatrice Bellamy, impeccably dressed even at a M on Christmas morning. I smoothed my emerald silk dress chosen because Grayson had once mentioned it was his favorite color on me and opened the door to reveal the Bellamy family in all their coordinated perfection. Beatrice stood front and center, her silver hair styled in what I'd learned was a $300 weekly maintenance routine, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car payment. Elena, darling, she said, offering me the air kisses I'd never quite mastered. What a lovely home you've created. The compliment felt like a criticism, delivered with that particular Bellamy skill of making approval sound like surprise. Behind her, Robert Bellamy nodded politely, while their younger son Marcus and his wife Jennifer arranged themselves like a Christmas card come to life. Their two children, 8-year-old Sophia and 10-year-old William, stood perfectly still, in their matching velvet outfits, hands folded, looking like they'd been pressed and starched along with their clothes. Please, come in, I said, stepping aside to let them enter. Can I take your coats? Is that Mexican music? Beatrice asked, her tone carefully neutral as Mommy's humming drifted in from the kitchen. My mother is helping with some of the traditional dishes, I said, suddenly self-conscious about the cultural mixing I'd been so excited about an hour ago. I thought it would be nice to share some of our family traditions. How authentic, Beatrice said, which somehow made authenticity sound like a character flaw. The families met in the kitchen, and for a moment, I held my breath. Mom, flour dusting her apron, looked up from her masa preparation and smiled with the kind of genuine warmth that had been absent from my life for months. Beatrice, diamond earrings catching the light, extended a perfectly manicured hand. Mrs. Ruiz, how lovely to finally meet you, Beatrice said in her boarding school accent. Please, call me Luz, Mom replied, wiping her hands on her apron before accepting the handshake. And thank you for raising such a good man. Elena is so happy. I watched Beatrice's face carefully calibrate her response. Grayson speaks of Elena so fondly. It was a graceful dodge, neither confirming nor denying happiness, neither warm nor cold. Peak Bellamy diplomacy. Where is Grayson? Robert asked, checking his Rolex with the precision of a man whose time was measured in billable hours. Conference call with Tokyo, I explained, the excuse tasting more bitter each time I said it. He'll be down soon. On Christmas morning? Jennifer asked, her voice carrying just enough concern to highlight the strangeness without seeming critical. The demands of international business, I replied, but even I could hear how hollow it sounded. As the morning progressed, I found myself caught between two worlds that seemed determined not to mix. Mom told stories about Christmas in Guadalajara, her hands gesturing expressively as she described midnight mass and neighbors sharing tamales. The Bellamys listened politely, offering the kind of interested but distant attention one might give to a documentary about foreign customs. Meanwhile, Beatrice shared updates about their social circle who was spending the holidays in Gstaad, which family had just purchased a new yacht, whose daughter had gotten engaged to a senator's son. Mom nodded along, but I could see the slight furrow in her brow as she tried to relate to problems like having to fire a yacht captain or choosing between Aspen and Vail for New Year's. I moved between both conversations, translating not just languages, but entire worldviews, feeling like I was slowly disappearing in the process. Elena makes the most beautiful tamales, Mom said proudly, showing Jennifer the neat corn husk parcels she'd been assembling. I taught her when she was 7 years old. Now she's better than me. How interesting, Jennifer replied. We've never tried making them at home. Do you buy the ingredients at a regular grocery store? The question was innocent enough, but something about it made me flinch. The assumption that Mexican food was exotic, that its ingredients might not be available at regular stores, that making tamales was somehow more foreign than making Yorkshire pudding. Most stores carry everything you need, I said quickly, before Mom could respond. It's really not complicated. But even as I said it, I realized I was apologizing for my own culture, making it smaller and less significant to fit into their comfort zone. When had I started doing that? When had I decided that the best way to belong was to erase the parts of myself that made me different? By PM, the house was full of competing energy. The Bellamys had claimed the living room, drinks in hand, discussing the stock market and real estate prices. Mom had commandeered the kitchen, humming and stirring and occasionally calling out observations about the cooking process that I'd translate for anyone who seemed interested. Grayson had appeared briefly around noon, shaking hands and accepting compliments on the house before disappearing back upstairs for another quick call. Each time someone asked about him, I felt like I was defending a ghost. He's working so hard on this new development, I explained to Robert, who'd asked about Grayson's career trajectory. It's a huge opportunity for the firm, the Riverside project. Robert nodded approvingly. I heard Hartwell landed that contract. Massive undertaking. My blood went cold. Grayson had never mentioned any Riverside project. In fact, he'd been increasingly vague about his work over the past few months, brushing off my questions with generic responses about deals in development and confidential clients. Yes, I said carefully, it's been consuming most of his time. Well, that's the price of success, Robert replied. I remember when I was building my practice, I missed more family dinners than I care to count, but it pays off eventually. I nodded and smiled, but inside, questions were multiplying like cracks in glass. Why didn't I know about the Riverside project? Why had Grayson never mentioned it, especially if it was significant enough that Robert, who rarely paid attention to details outside his own firm, knew about it? As the afternoon wore on, I found myself studying the interactions around me with new eyes. Marcus and Jennifer moved through conversations with the practiced ease of people who'd been raised in this world. They knew which topics to discuss, which questions to ask, which comments would earn approval and which would be met with polite silence. I'd been trying to learn these rules for 10 years, and I still felt like I was playing a game where everyone else had been given the instruction manual, while I was left to figure out the rules through trial and error. Elena, this puzzle is exceptional, Beatrice said, sampling the soup I'd spent hours perfecting. Though it's quite spicy. Perhaps next time you might consider a milder version? Of course, I replied automatically, then caught myself. Why was I agreeing to change a recipe that had been in my family for generations? Why was my first instinct to accommodate rather than to educate? But before I could explore that thought further, Grayson appeared in the doorway, and the entire room shifted its attention to him like flowers turning toward the sun. Sorry to keep everyone waiting, he said, his smile bright but somehow not reaching his eyes. Work never stops, even on Christmas. He was wearing the navy sweater I'd bought him, the one that brought out his eyes and made him look like he'd stepped out of a catalog. His hair was perfectly styled, his posture confident, his presence commanding. This was the Grayson who'd swept me off my feet in college, the one who'd made me believe I could be part of his world. But as he moved through the room, accepting hugs and compliments, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. He greeted his family with genuine warmth, asked about their lives with real interest, laughed at their jokes with authentic pleasure. But when he turned to me, when he kissed my cheek and asked how things were going, there was a distance in his eyes that I'd been pretending not to see for months. Dinner's ready, I announced, eager to focus on something concrete, something I could control. The dining room looked like a magazine spread. The table gleamed under the chandelier, set with our finest china and crystal. Candles flickered softly, casting warm light over the carefully arranged centerpieces. The food was perfect, the prime rib pink and tender, the vegetables roasted to caramelize perfection, the tamales aromatic and authentic. This is absolutely stunning, Elena, Jennifer said, and for the first time all day, the compliment felt genuine. You've outdone yourself, Marcus added, raising his wine glass in a small toast. Even Beatrice seemed impressed, though she expressed it in her typically measured way. You've created a very elegant evening, dear. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel proud. I'd done it. I'd created the perfect Christmas dinner, bringing together two families, two cultures, two worlds. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe this was when I'd finally stop feeling like a guest in my own life. Grayson stood to carve the roast, and I watched him work with the same efficient precision he brought to everything. He'd always been good with his hands, methodical, and skilled. It was one of the things I'd fallen in love with, the way he could fix things, build things, create order from chaos. Elena, he said as he arranged the meat on the serving platter, could you bring the wine from the kitchen? The bottle. On the counter. Of course, I returned with the wine, a bottle of Cabernet we'd been saving for a special occasion. As I handed it to him, our fingers brushed, and I felt that familiar electric current that had always existed between us. For a second, he looked at me with something that might have been the old affection, and I thought maybe I'd been imagining the distance. Then he cleared his throat and stood up, wine glass in hand. I want to thank everyone for being here today, he began, his voice carrying the confident tone he used for presentations. It means a lot to have both families together. For Christmas. Nods and murmurs of agreement around the table. I felt myself relax, preparing for what I assumed would be a toast about gratitude and family and the meaning of the season. Elena has worked so hard to make this perfect, he continued, and I smiled, grateful for the acknowledgement. And I think the setting is appropriate for what I need to share. Something in his tone made me look up sharply. There was a formality to his words that didn't match the warmth of the evening. Around the table, I noticed others shifting slightly, sensing the same change in energy. The past few months have been a time of reflection for me, Grayson continued, setting down his wine glass and reaching into his jacket pocket. About what I want, where I'm going, and what I need to do to get there. He pulled out a manila envelope, crisp and official looking. My heart began to race, though I couldn't yet name why. Elena, he said, turning to me with what I would later realize was practice compassion. I know this isn't ideal timing, but I believe honesty is always the best policy, even when it's difficult. The room had gone completely silent. Even the children seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. Mom was staring at Grayson with the kind of maternal radar that could detect danger from across a room. I've been working with my attorney over the past several weeks, Grayson continued, his voice steady and businesslike. And I think it's time we both moved forward with our lives. He held out the envelope to me, and I stared at it like it was a snake that might bite me. Grayson, I whispered, but he was already placing the envelope in my hands. These are divorce papers, Elena. I think it's best for both of us. The words hit me like a physical blow. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Around the table, I was dimly aware of shocked gasps, the scrape of chairs as people shifted uncomfortably, someone's wine glass hitting the table harder than intended. You're, what? I managed to say. I know it's a shock, Grayson said, but his tone suggested he thought it shouldn't be. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we've been growing apart for some time. This just makes it official. I looked around the table, seeing my humiliation reflected in everyone's faces. Beatrice had gone completely still, her face a mask of controlled horror. Robert was staring at his son like he'd never seen him before. Marcus and Jennifer were looking anywhere but at me, their discomfort palpable. But it was Mommy's face that broke my heart. She was looking at me with such fierce protectiveness, such rage on my behalf, that I almost started crying right there. On Christmas? I whispered. In front of our families? I thought it was important to be transparent, Grayson said, as if he'd done something admirable. I don't believe in deception. The irony of that statement would hit me later, when I discovered just how much deception had been involved in getting to this moment. But right then, I was too shocked to process anything beyond the immediate humiliation. Grayson, Beatrice said, her voice tight with controlled fury. This is hardly the appropriate time or place, Mother, please, he interrupted. This is between Elena and me. But it wasn't between Elena and me. He'd made sure of that by choosing this moment, this audience, this maximally humiliating stage for his announcement. This was about power, about control, about making sure I understood exactly where I stood. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, my vision blurring at the edges. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of trying to be the wife he wanted, the daughter-in-law his mother could accept, the woman worthy of his name and his world. And this was how it ended. Not with a private conversation, not with counseling or attempts at reconciliation, but with legal documents served like a summons at the Christmas dinner table. I started to speak, but no words came. What was there to say? How did one respond to such a perfectly orchestrated betrayal? Elena, Grayson said, his voice taking on a note of gentle condescension that made me want to scream. I know this is difficult, but I think when you've had time to process, You realize this is the right decision for both of us, right decision? The words came out as a whisper, but I felt them building into something bigger, something that might explode if I let it. We want different things, he continued, as if he was explaining something simple to a child. You want the quiet life, the domestic routine. I'm building something bigger, something that requires focus and dedication. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. He was divorcing me, humiliating me in front of both our families, ending our marriage with the cold efficiency of a business transaction, and it was nothing personal. I stood up so abruptly that my chair toppled backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made everyone jump. The envelope fell from my hands, spilling its contents across the table, legal documents with my name typed in cold, official font. Elena Grayson started. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. No, you don't get to do this. Not like this. Not here. I turned and walked out of the dining room, through the living room, up the stairs to our bedroom, no, his bedroom now, and locked the door behind me. Only then did I allow myself to collapse. I sat on the floor of our walk-in closet, surrounded by the clothes I'd carefully chosen to fit into his world, and let the tears come. They were hot and angry and filled with 10 years of swallowed words, accommodated preferences, and erased identity. Through the floor, I could hear the murmur of shocked voices, the scrape of chairs, the sound of a dinner party dissolving into chaos. I wondered if they were comforting him, if they were discussing what a difficult decision this must have been for him, if they were already moving on to dessert. But underneath the immediate pain, something else was stirring, something that would take me days to fully recognize. But that started in that moment as I sat surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd built around someone else's dreams. It was rage. Pure, clean, and focusing. The kind of rage that didn't explode but burned steady and hot, like a furnace that could power something much bigger than the small, accommodating woman I'd become. I picked up one of the scattered legal documents, scanning the dense paragraphs of legalese that apparently represented the end of my marriage. And that's when I saw a clause about intellectual property rights that made my blood run cold, because according to this document, I had no claim to the company we'd built together, the startup I'd helped create, the algorithms I'd helped develop, the countless hours I'd spent building something from nothing. According to these papers, none of that belonged to me. I grabbed my phone and called the one person who would understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Nico, I said when he answered, my voice barely controlled. Elena, what's wrong? He did it, I said. He actually did it. Did what? Served me divorce papers. At Christmas dinner, in front of both families. The silence on the other end was so long I thought the call had dropped. That motherfucker, Nico finally said, and despite everything, I almost smiled. Leave it to my best friend to cut through the shock and get straight to the heart of the matter. Nico, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice getting steadier with each word. This isn't just about the divorce. He's trying to steal the company. What? The papers, they include IP clauses that would give him full ownership of everything we built together. Everything, Nico. Like I was never even part of it. Another pause, and when Nico spoke again, his voice had changed. Gone was the sympathetic friend, replaced by the sharp-eyed business strategist who'd built his own empire from nothing. Elena, he said carefully, do you still have access to the company files? Yes. Why? Because if he's trying to steal your company, we need to know exactly what he's trying to steal. And more importantly, we need to prove it was yours to begin with. I looked around the closet, at the beautiful clothes and expensive shoes and perfect accessories. That had been my costume for playing the part of Mrs. Grayson Bellamy. Tomorrow, I would start taking them off. Tomorrow, I would remember who Elena Ruiz was before she started disappearing into someone else's life. I'll be right over, Nico said. And Elena, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't even talk to him until we figure out what we're dealing with, okay? And Elena, I know this feels like the end of the world right now, but I need you to trust me on something. What? Men like Grayson always underestimate women like us. They think we're weak because we're kind, that we're stupid because we're loyal, but they're wrong. And when they realize how wrong they are, it's going to be too late. I hung up and sat in the silence of the closet, surrounded by the artifacts of a life I'd built around someone else's dreams. Downstairs, I could hear cars starting, the sounds of a Christmas dinner, ending in scandal and awkwardness. But for the first time in months, I wasn't worried about what they thought of me. I wasn't concerned about fitting in or earning approval or being the perfect wife. I was thinking about justice. And I was thinking about revenge. I woke up the next morning in the guest bedroom, having spent the night locked away while the aftermath of Christmas dinner played out below. The house was eerily quiet, no sounds of coffee brewing, no familiar morning routine, no pretense of normalcy, just silence and the crushing weight of a life that had been upended in the space of a single dinner course. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I scrolled through them with detached interest, like I was reading about someone else's life. Jennifer had texted, "I'm so sorry, Elena. If you need anything." Marcus had called twice. Even Robert had sent a brief message, inappropriate timing. "We'll speak to Grayson." But it was the message from Verity Bellamy that made me sit up straighter. "Elena, I'm still in town. Don't know if you want to see anyone right now, but I'm not leaving until we talk." That was fucking unacceptable, even for my brother, Verity, Grayson's younger sister, the black sheep of the Bellamy family who'd been conspicuously absent from most family gatherings for the past 3 years. She'd shown up yesterday like a ghost from Christmas past, her purple hair and vintage band T-shirt a stark contrast to the carefully coordinated elegance of the rest of the family. I'd always liked Verity, but we'd never been particularly close. She existed on the periphery of Grayson's world, tolerated but never embraced, visiting just often enough to maintain the appearance of family unity while making it clear she belonged to a different universe entirely. But right now, different sounded exactly like what I needed. I texted back, "I'm here. Come over." She arrived 30 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. She was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, her makeup slightly smudged, her hair messier than usual. "Rough night?" I asked, letting her in. "I may have gotten spectacularly drunk after that shit show," she said, handing me a coffee. Which is saying something, because I was already pretty buzzed when your husband decided to drop his Christmas bomb. We sat in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of yesterday's celebration. The Christmas tree still twinkled cheerfully, completely oblivious to the fact that the family it had been meant to unite was now scattered to the winds. "I can't believe he did that," Verity said, shaking her head. "I mean, I knew Grayson was capable of some cold shit, but that was next level, even for him." "You knew?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what I meant by the question. "I didn't know about the divorce," she said quickly, "but I knew something was off. He's been different lately, more calculating, more like Dad actually, which is never a good sign." She took a sip of her coffee and studied me with the kind of direct gaze that made me feel like she was seeing through all the polite facades I'd built over the years. "The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you going to let him get away with humiliating you like that? Are you going to quietly sign his papers and disappear so he can pretend this marriage never happened?" The question hit me like a slap. Was that what I was planning to do? Was I so well trained in accommodation that I would accept even this level of betrayal? "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Well, the first thing you're supposed to do is stop thinking about what you're supposed to do and start thinking about what you want to do." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Grayson's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it like it was a snake. "Don't answer," Verity said immediately. "I have to. I can't just ignore Elena." Her voice was sharp enough to cut through my automatic compliance. "You don't have to do anything. You don't owe him conversation, or understanding, or forgiveness. You don't owe him shit." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. "He's persistent," I said. "He's controlling," Verity corrected. "There's a difference. This time." I let it go to voicemail. Then I turned the phone face down on the coffee table and looked at Verity with something that might have been the beginning of resolve. "Tell me about the calculating part," I said. "What's been different about him?" Verity leaned forward, her expression serious. "He's been asking questions about family finances, about trust funds, about who has access to what. And he's been spending a lot of time with lawyers." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he's planning something big, something that requires legal protection." I felt that familiar chill, the same one I'd experienced when I'd seen the IP clauses in the divorce papers. "Verity, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, okay? Do you know anything about a woman named Amanda Fletcher?" Verity's expression shifted, and I knew immediately that she did. Fuck, she said quietly. How did you find out? I didn't. I'm guessing. But your face just told me everything I needed to know. She ran her hands through her purple hair, making it even messier. Elena, I'm sorry. I should have said something, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to hurt you if I was wrong. How long? I don't know. Months, maybe longer. I saw them together at a gallery opening in Denver a few months ago. They looked comfortable, like it wasn't their first time together. The betrayal hit me in waves, not just the affair itself, but the timeline. Months. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. The distance I'd felt, the vague responses about work, the increasing number of business trips and late meetings, it had all been preparation for this moment. There's something else, Verity said carefully. Something about the divorce papers. That doesn't make sense. What do you mean? I saw them yesterday, when you dropped them. I recognize the letterhead. It's from Patterson and Associates. That's not just any law firm, Elena. That's the firm that handles all the high-stakes corporate stuff for our family. Asset protection, international contracts, the kind of legal work that costs more per hour than most people make in a month. So, why would Grayson need that level of legal firepower for a divorce? Unless there's something he's trying to protect, or something he's trying to take. I thought about the IP clauses, about the company we'd built together, about the fact that I'd given up my own engineering career to help him build his dream. The startup, I said slowly. He's trying to cut me out of the company. What startup? We've been building a tech company together for the past 5 years. Sustainable architecture software. It was supposed to be our joint venture, our future. But according to the divorce papers, I have no claim to any of it. Verity's eyes widened. Elena, that's not just divorce. That's theft. But it's legal, right? I mean, if it's in the divorce papers, if his lawyers drew it up, legal doesn't mean right. And legal doesn't mean unchallenged. She stood up and began pacing, her energy shifting from sympathy to something more dangerous. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Okay, do you want to fight this? I mean, really fight it, not just go through the motions of divorce proceedings, because if you do, I can help you. But it's going to get ugly, and it's going to get public, and my family is going to hate both of us. I looked around the living room again, at the Christmas tree and the expensive furniture and all the trappings of a life I'd built around someone else's dreams. Then I thought about the company, about the algorithms I'd helped develop, about the countless hours I'd spent building something from nothing while Grayson got all the credit. I don't want to fight, I said slowly. I want to win. Verity smiled, and for the first time since yesterday, I saw something that looked like hope. Good, she said, because I know exactly where to start. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Raina, it's Verity Bellamy. I need a favor, and it's urgent. While she spoke, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in months. Agency. For the first time since Grayson had handed me those papers, I wasn't just reacting to his decisions. I was making my own. She'll see you today, Verity said, hanging up. 2:00 at her office in downtown Denver. Who's Raina? Raina Gomez. She's a divorce attorney, but not the kind who handles amicable separations and custody agreements. She's the kind who protects women when their husbands try to screw them over financially. She's also the kind who doesn't lose. I felt a flutter of something that might have been nervous excitement. Verity, I can't afford that kind of lawyer. If she handles high-stakes divorces, Elena, stop thinking like someone who has to accept whatever's offered to her. You helped build a company that's apparently valuable enough for Grayson to steal. You have assets, even if he's trying to hide them from you. She was right, but the thought of fighting someone with Grayson's resources felt overwhelming. The Bellamy's had been playing legal chess at the highest levels for generations. What did I know about protecting myself against that kind of machinery? Besides, Verity added with a grin that reminded me she was definitely related to Grayson, Raina owes me a favor, a big one. After Verity left, I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in years. I went through our financial records with the sharp eye of the engineer I used to be, not the accommodating wife I'd become. What I found made my stomach turn. Over the past 6 months, Grayson had been moving money, large amounts, transferred to accounts I didn't recognize, categorized as business expenses and development costs. There were charges to restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in cities he'd never mentioned visiting, jewelry purchases that had never appeared in my jewelry box, but it was the pattern of payments to Patterson and Associates that really caught my attention. They'd been receiving monthly retainers for the past 8 months. 8 months. He'd been planning this divorce since April, maybe earlier. I printed everything, creating a paper trail that told the story of a man systematically preparing to erase his wife from their shared life. By the time I finished, I had a stack of documents 3 inches thick and a rage so pure it felt like clarity. My phone had been buzzing intermittently all morning with calls from Grayson that I'd ignored. Finally, around noon, he switched tactics and simply walked into the house. "Elena," he called from the entryway. "We need to talk." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I came downstairs carrying my stack of printed financial records, and the sight of him in our living room made me feel like I was looking at a stranger. How had I lived with this man for 10 years without seeing the calculating coldness that now seemed so obvious? "Good," I said, setting the papers on the coffee table. "We do need to talk." He looked surprised by my calm tone, like he'd been expecting tears or hysteria. "I know yesterday was difficult." 8 months, I interrupted. "What? You've been paying divorce lawyers for 8 months. While I was planning Christmas dinner and trying to figure out why you seemed so distant, you were systematically preparing to destroy our marriage." His face went carefully blank, the expression I now recognized as his tell when he was calculating his next move. "Elena, I think you're misunderstanding." "Am I misunderstanding the hotel charges in Denver? The restaurant bills for 2 when you told me you were working late? The jewelry purchases that never made it home?" For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw something that looked almost like respect flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the patronizing concern that had become his default mode with me. "I know this is painful," he said, settling into the chair across from me like we were having a business meeting. "But dragging it out isn't going to help either of us. If you sign the papers, we can keep this clean and simple." "Clean and simple," I repeated. "Like cutting me out of the company I helped build?" "Elena, you haven't been involved in the day-to-day operations for years. You made the choice to step back." "I stepped back to support your career. I gave up my engineering position so you could chase your dreams, and I helped you build those dreams into something real. The algorithms that power our software, I wrote half of them. The client presentations that landed our biggest contracts, I researched and formatted every one. The business plan that got us our initial funding, we wrote it together at this kitchen table. You're being emotional, I'm being factual. And the fact is, you're trying to steal something that belongs to both of us." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used when he wanted to end discussions. "Elena, I'm not trying to hurt you, but the reality is that the company has grown beyond what either of us originally envisioned. It requires a level of focus and dedication that you don't think I'm capable of. That requires someone who's fully committed to the business side, not distracted by domestic responsibilities." The casual dismissal of my contributions, the reduction of my value to domestic responsibilities, hit me like a physical blow. But instead of crumbling, I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was about 10 years of being slowly erased, reduced, made smaller to make room for his expanding ego. "I want you to leave," I said, quietly. "Elena, I want you to pack whatever you need and get out of this house. And I want you to know that I'm not signing anything until I've had those papers reviewed by my own attorney." "Your own attorney?" He looked genuinely surprised, like the idea that I might have independent legal representation had never occurred to him. "Did you think I was just going to accept this? Did you think I'd quietly disappear so you could rewrite our history?" "I think you're upset, and you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." He studied my face, and I could see him recalibrating, trying to figure out how to handle this version of me that he'd apparently never planned for. "Fine," he said finally. "Take time to process." "But Elena, fighting this isn't going to change anything. I've already filed the papers. I've already made the decision." "You made a decision," I corrected. "I haven't made mine yet." After he left, taking a suitcase and his laptop and the cold, business-like attitude that I now realized had been his true nature all along, I sat in the quiet house and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. 10 years of marriage ended with the efficiency of a corporate restructuring. A life I'd built around someone else's dreams, dismantled with legal documents and financial maneuvers. A partnership I'd thought was equal, revealed to be nothing more than a Convenient arrangement that could be dissolved when it was no longer useful. But underneath the grief and humiliation, something else was growing. Something that felt like the woman I'd been before I started accommodating myself into invisibility. At T1:30, I drove to downtown Denver to meet Reina Gomez, my stack of financial documents in a briefcase beside me. The city looked different somehow, sharper and more real than it had in months. Or maybe I was the one who was different. Reina's office was in one of those sleek downtown buildings that screamed expensive legal services. The waiting room was decorated in soothing neutrals, with carefully chosen art and the kind of furniture that looked comfortable, but cost more than most people's cars. When Reina emerged to greet me, I understood immediately why Verity had recommended her. She was impeccably dressed, but not flashy, professional but not cold, and when she shook my hand, her grip conveyed the kind of confidence that comes from winning battles other people are afraid to fight. "Elena," she said, "I'm so sorry about what happened yesterday." Verity filled me in on the basics, but I'd like to hear the story from you. Her office was a study in controlled power law books, framed degrees, and what looked like thank you letters from grateful clients covered the walls. But it was the family photo on her desk that made me relax slightly. A woman and 2 children, all smiling at a beach somewhere, looking like they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "I brought financial records," I said, setting my briefcase on her desk. "And the divorce papers Grayson served yesterday." Reina spread the documents across her desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen this story before. As she read, her expression grew progressively more serious. "Elena," she said finally, "these aren't just divorce papers. This is a comprehensive asset seizure disguised as a divorce settlement." "What do you mean?" "I mean your husband isn't just trying to end your marriage. He's trying to retroactively erase your contributions to your shared business, remove you from any future profits, and leave you with minimal assets while he walks away with everything you built together." She pulled out a highlighter and began marking sections of the documents. "Look at this clause here. It states that you waive all rights to intellectual property developed during the marriage. And this one here gives him sole ownership of the company's future earnings. And this," she paused, her expression darkening, "this is particularly egregious." "What?" "According to this document, you're acknowledging that your contributions to the business were minimal and that you have no claim to the company's current valuation or future growth." I stared at the papers, seeing them clearly for the first time. "But I never agreed to any of that." "I haven't signed anything." "No, but according to this, you signed a modified prenuptial agreement in March that included these clauses." "That's impossible. I never signed any modification to our prenup." Reina looked up from the papers, her expression sharp with interest. "Elena, I need you to think very carefully. Did Grayson ever ask you to sign any documents? Maybe he presented them as routine business paperwork, or tax documents, or insurance forms." I closed my eyes, thinking back through the blur of the past year. There had been so many documents: business filings, tax forms, insurance updates. Grayson had always handled the paperwork, presenting me with stacks of papers to sign while explaining that they were routine or just updating our information. "There were papers," I said slowly, "in March, maybe April." "He said they were updates to our business insurance, something required by our new investor." I signed them without reading them carefully. "Do you have copies?" "I should. I keep copies of everything in our home office." Reina leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since I'd entered her office, she smiled. It wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey. "Elena, if what you're telling me is true, then your husband committed fraud. He presented you with documents under false pretenses, documents that you had no reason to believe were modifications to your prenuptial agreement." "What does that mean?" "It means the entire legal foundation of his divorce filing is built on fraudulent documents. And it means we can not only fight his asset grab, we can probably destroy him in the process." I felt something shift inside me, like a gear clicking into place. For the first time since yesterday, I wasn't just reacting to Grayson's moves. I was planning my own. "What do I need to do?" "First, we need to get those original documents from your home office. Then we need to build a timeline of exactly what happened and when. After that," she smiled again, and this time it was definitely predatory. "After that, we're going to teach your husband what happens when someone tries to steal from the wrong woman." "I need you to understand something before we go any further," Reina said, leaning forward across her desk. What we're dealing with here isn't just a messy divorce. Your husband has committed multiple felonies: document fraud, identity theft, potentially wire fraud if he's moved money based on these false documents. This could destroy him professionally and personally. The weight of her words settled over me like a blanket. Part of me, the part that had spent 10 years smoothing over conflicts and avoiding confrontation, wanted to pull back, to find a gentler solution. But the larger part, the part that had been systematically erased and diminished, felt a fierce satisfaction at the idea of consequences. I want him to face consequences, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I want him to understand that he can't just rewrite reality to suit his convenience. Good. Because what I'm about to propose isn't for the faint of heart. We're not just going to defend against his divorce filing. We're going to go on the offensive. She opened a legal pad and began sketching what looked like a battle plan. First, we establish the fraud. We get the original documents. We prove he misrepresented what you were signing, and we file criminal charges. That puts him on the defensive immediately. Criminal charges? The magnitude of what she was suggesting began to sink in. Elena, he forged your signature on legal documents that transferred millions of dollars in assets away from you. In Colorado, that's theft in the first degree. It carries up to 12 years in prison. I tried to imagine Grayson in prison and found I couldn't. He was too polished, too connected, too certain of his own invincibility. But maybe that was exactly why he needed to face real consequences. What else? We freeze all marital assets immediately. Bank accounts, business accounts, everything. If he's been moving money in preparation for this divorce, we stop that right now. Then we demand a full forensic accounting of the business. Every dollar that's come in, every dollar that's gone out, every contract and client relationship. We're going to prove your contributions weren't just significant, they were essential. She flipped to a new page on her legal pad. But here's where it gets interesting. You said the company is preparing for an IPO? That's what he's been working toward. He's been talking about it for months, saying it's our big opportunity. Our opportunity, Raina repeated with a bitter laugh. Except according to his divorce filing, it's entirely his opportunity. Elena, do you have any idea what the company is worth? I shook my head. Grayson always handled the financials. He said I didn't need to worry about the business side. Well, you're going to learn fast. Because if this company is valuable enough for him to commit fraud to steal it, then it's valuable enough for us to fight for it. She stood up and began pacing, her energy infectious. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to demand immediate access to all business records. We're going to hire our own forensic accountant. And we're going to prepare a counterclaim that doesn't just seek fair division of assets, it seeks damages for fraud, emotional distress, and loss of future earnings. How much are we talking about? That depends on what we find. But Elena, if this company is worth what I think it might be worth, we could be looking at tens of millions of dollars. The number was so large it didn't feel real. I'd grown up in a world where financial security meant having enough money to pay bills without choosing between groceries and rent. The idea that I might be entitled to tens of millions felt like something that happened to other people. There's something else, Raina continued. Verity mentioned that Grayson has been asking questions about family finances. That suggests he might be planning to hide assets, maybe move money offshore or transfer ownership to family members. If we can prove that, it adds additional criminal charges. How do we prove it? That's where it gets tricky. We need someone on the inside, someone who can access information about his recent activities, his communication, his plans. She paused, studying my face. Do you still have access to his email accounts, his calendar, his business files? I thought about the shared laptop we'd use for business, the cloud accounts that were still synced to my phone, the passwords I'd helped him set up years ago when he'd been less careful about digital security. Yes, I said slowly. He never changed the passwords. I don't think it occurred to him that I might use them. Perfect. Because we're going to use every legal tool available to gather evidence. And Elena? She sat back down, her expression serious. I need you to understand that once we start this process, there's no going back. Grayson is going to realize that. He seriously underestimated you, and he's going to fight back with everything he has. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the humiliation of yesterday's dinner, about the months of feeling like I was disappearing, about the casual way he'd dismissed my contributions to our shared life. I thought about Amanda Fletcher and the jewelry purchases that had never made it home, about the hotel bills and restaurant charges that told the story of a parallel life I'd been excluded from. I'm prepared, I said. What do I do first? First, we go to your house and get those original documents. I want to see exactly what he tricked you into signing. Then we start building our case. The drive back to the house felt surreal. Just this morning, I'd been a woman reeling from a devastating betrayal, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been destroyed without warning. Now I was part of a legal strategy that could destroy the man who'd tried to erase me. Raina followed me in her own car, a sleek BMW that looked like it cost more than I'd made in my last year of actual employment. She was dressed for battle in a sharp black suit and heels that clicked against the driveway with military precision. Beautiful house, she said, looking up at the sprawling mountain contemporary that Grayson and I had designed together during the early years of our marriage. Did you to build this? We designed it. I did most of the actual design work. It was one of the projects that convinced us we could work together professionally. And according to his divorce filing, you have no claim to the house either. The casual mention of another thing he was trying to steal from me sent a fresh wave of anger through my system. This house represented some of my best work, my most personal creativity. The open floor plan that maximized the mountain views, the sustainable materials, the way the interior spaces flowed seamlessly into the landscape, those had been my innovations, my vision. Inside, I led Raina to the home office, a converted bedroom that housed our shared business documents. The filing system was mine, organized, labeled, color-coded. Grayson had always joked that I was obsessively neat, but now I was grateful for every carefully filed document. Here, I said, pulling out a thick folder labeled Business Documents 2024. Everything from this year should be in here. Raina spread the documents across the desk, and I watched her face as she read through them. Her expression grew progressively more incredulous, then angry, then something that looked almost like excitement. Elena, she said finally, this is even worse than I thought. Worse how? Look at this. She held up a document that looked familiar. I remembered signing it in March, when Grayson had presented it as an insurance update. This isn't an insurance form. This is a complete transfer of your intellectual property rights, your ownership stake in the company, and your claim to any future profits. I stared at the document, seeing it clearly for the first time. The language was dense and technical, buried in paragraphs about updates to business structures and alignment with new investment requirements. No wonder I hadn't understood what I was signing. And look at this signature, Raina pointed to the bottom of the page where my name was written in what looked like my handwriting. Does that look right to you? I studied the signature closely. It was close to mine, but not quite right. The E in Elena was too elaborate, the R in Ruiz slightly malformed. That's not my signature, I said slowly. It's close, but it's not mine. He forged it, Raina said with satisfaction. The bastard actually forged your signature on a legal document transferring millions of dollars in assets. Elena, this isn't just fraud, this is criminal conspiracy. She began photographing each document with her phone, creating a digital record. We need to get these to a handwriting expert immediately. And we need to check your other accounts, bank statements, credit cards, anything he might have had access to. For the next 2 hours, we went through every financial record in the house. What we found painted a picture of systematic deception that went back almost a year. Transfers to accounts I'd never heard of, charges to services I'd never used, payments to legal firms and consultants that he'd never mentioned, but it was the email account that provided the most damning evidence. Grayson had been careless about digital security, using the same passwords for years and syncing his accounts across multiple devices. When I logged into his business email from our shared laptop, months of correspondence opened up like a book. Look at this, I said, pointing to an email chain from September. He's been talking to investors about the IPO for months, and look, he's referring to himself as the sole founder of the company. Raina read over my shoulder, her breathing growing sharper with each email. This is gold, Elena. He's not just trying to steal your assets, he's actively rewriting history to erase your contributions entirely. We found emails to Amanda Fletcher, casual and intimate, dating back over a year. We found correspondence with his lawyers about asset protection strategies and minimizing spousal claims. We found discussions with his business partner about Restructuring ownership before the IPO. Most damning of all, we found a draft press release about the company's upcoming public offering. In it, Grayson was described as the visionary founder who had built the company from nothing. There was no mention of a co-founder, no reference to the wife who had helped design the algorithms that made the company valuable. I need copies of all of this, Raina said. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that shows his intent to defraud you. As we worked, I felt something shifting inside me. The woman who had spent yesterday crying in a closet was being replaced by someone harder, sharper, more focused. This wasn't just about getting a fair divorce settlement anymore. This was about justice. Raina, I said, as we finished copying the last of the files, I want to ask you something. What? How much of this can we make public? What do you mean? I mean, the IPO is scheduled for New Year's Eve, right? A big launch party. Lots of investors and media attention. If we're going to expose what he's done, I want to do it in a way that maximizes the impact. Raina stopped what she was doing and turned to look at me. Elena, are you talking about destroying his business reputation as well as his legal position? I'm talking about making sure everyone knows exactly who Grayson Bellamy really is. His investors, his clients, his business partners, everyone who's been taken in by his charm and his lies. That's ambitious and risky. If we go public with accusations before we have ironclad proof, he could sue us for defamation. But if we have ironclad proof, Raina smiled, and this time it was pure predator. If we have ironclad proof, we can destroy him so completely that he'll never recover. I looked around the office, at the files and documents that represented 5 years of shared work, shared dreams, shared ambitions that had apparently only been shared in my imagination. Then I thought about yesterday's humiliation, about the casual cruelty of serving divorce papers at Christmas dinner, about the methodical way he'd planned to erase me from our shared story. Then let's get ironclad proof, I said. And let's make sure the whole world sees exactly what happens when someone tries to steal from the wrong woman. As we left the house, carrying boxes of evidence and a plan that was growing more audacious by the hour, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the borrowed power of being Mrs. Grayson Bellamy, but the real power that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. Grayson had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was weak because I'd been accommodating, that I was helpless because I'd been supportive. He'd confused kindness with stupidity, loyalty with passivity. He was about to learn the difference. The next morning, I called Nico Tran from Raina's office, putting him on speaker so she could hear our conversation. I'd known Nico since college. He'd been my roommate's boyfriend before becoming my closest friend, the kind of person who could make you laugh even when your world was falling apart. Elena, honey, I've been worried sick. His voice filled the room with its familiar warmth. How are you holding up? I'm done holding up, I said. I'm ready to fight back. Thank God. I was hoping you'd say that. What do you need? I need you to do what you do best, dig into people's social media and find out everything you can about Amanda Fletcher and her relationship with Grayson. The other woman? Nico's tone sharpened with interest. Oh, this is going to be fun. What's her full name? Amanda Fletcher. She works in marketing, probably mid-30s, blonde. That's all I know. That's enough. Give me an hour. Raina raised her eyebrows as I hung up. Your friend sounds thorough. Nico runs a luxury interior design firm, but his real talent is social media archaeology. He can find out everything about a person's life from their digital footprint. If there's evidence of Grayson's affair online, he'll find it, and that helps us how? Because Grayson has been very careful to keep his infidelity quiet, at least from me. But if we can establish a timeline of his relationship with Amanda, it proves premeditation for the divorce. It shows he wasn't just unhappy in our marriage. He was actively planning his exit while lying to my face. 47 minutes later, Nico called back. Elena, darling, your husband is an idiot, he announced without preamble. Amanda Fletcher, 34, marketing director at Zenith Communications, originally from Portland, moved to Denver 18 months ago. And here's the interesting part, she's been tagging locations that match Grayson's business trips for over a year. What do you mean? I mean, when Grayson told you he was in San Francisco for a client meeting in October, Amanda posted Instagram photos from the same hotel. When he said he was in Chicago for a conference in September, she was at the same restaurant he charged to the company credit card. Raina leaned forward with interest. Can you prove the timeline? I can do better than that, Nico said. I can. Prove intent. Amanda's been posting about exciting new relationships and life-changing opportunities for months. And get this, she's been liking and commenting on posts about IPO launches and startup success stories. Someone's been filling her head with dreams of wealth and status. Send me everything, I said. Screenshots, timestamps, location data. All of it. Already done. Check your email. But Elena, there's something else. Amanda doesn't know she's the other woman. What? Based on her social media activity, she thinks Grayson is separated. Her posts reference supporting someone through a difficult divorce and being patient while he handles his ex-wife. She has no idea she's part of an elaborate deception. I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for Amanda. She wasn't just Grayson's affair partner, she was another one of his victims, manipulated with the same skillful lies he'd been using on me. That's actually perfect, Raina said. If we can prove he's been lying to both of you, it establishes a pattern of deception that supports our fraud claims. There's more, Nico continued. I found guest lists for several charity events over the past 6 months. Grayson attended with Amanda as his business associate, including the Denver Art Museum Gala and the Children's Hospital fundraiser. He's been parading her around in public while telling you he was working late. He took her to charity events? The betrayal felt fresh all over again. Those were events I should have attended with him, opportunities for me to build relationships in his professional circle. Instead, he'd been using them as cover for his affair. I'm sending you the photos. Professional shots from the event photographers. Perfectly public, completely damning. Your husband documented his own infidelity. After ending the call with Nico, Raina and I spent the afternoon building what she called our war room, a comprehensive timeline of Grayson's deception that included financial records, email correspondence, and now social media evidence. This is incredibly strong, Raina said, studying the printed Instagram photos that showed Grayson and Amanda at various Denver social events. He's not just been having an affair, he's been living a double life, taking her to industry events, introducing her to his professional contacts, building a relationship in the exact social circles where you should have been. What does that mean legally? It means we can argue that his infidelity wasn't just personal betrayal, it was professional sabotage. He was systematically replacing you in his business life while preparing to steal the company you helped build. That evening, I drove to Nico's showroom in downtown Denver's Design District. His space was a converted warehouse filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in European palaces, all arranged with the kind of effortless elegance that made million-dollar homes look cozy. Nico emerged from the back office wearing his signature combination of impeccably tailored clothes and perfectly messy hair, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression I recognized as his "I've found something." Good face, Elena, darling. You look different, he said, studying my face. More focused. I feel different, like I'm remembering who I used to be. Good. Because you're going to need that energy for what I found. He gestured toward a seating area surrounded by fabric samples and design books. Sit down. This gets complicated. He pulled up Amanda's social media profiles on his tablet, scrolling through months of posts with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years analyzing people's digital lives for business purposes. Here's what I've pieced together, he said. Amanda moved to Denver specifically for Grayson. She took a lower-paying job at Zenith Communications despite having better offers in other cities. Why? Because someone convinced her that Denver offered unique opportunities for her career growth. Grayson recruited her? More than that. I think he's been planning this entire scenario for over a year. Look at this email address I found in her professional bio. It's hosted on the same server as his business accounts. He helped her set up her professional identity in Denver. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Grayson hadn't just had an affair, he'd orchestrated an elaborate replacement plan, bringing Amanda to Denver and positioning her as his new partner both personally and professionally. There's more, Nico continued. I found references to exciting announcements and New Year's celebrations in her recent posts. I think he's planning to announce their relationship at the IPO launch party. At the IPO party? Think about it, what better way to debut his new life than at the moment of his greatest professional triumph? New company, new fortune, new woman, clean break from the past, fresh start for the future. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not only was he stealing the company we'd built together, he was planning to celebrate his theft with the woman he'd chosen as my replacement. Elena, Nico said gently, I know this is devastating, but it's also an opportunity. What do you mean? I mean, if he's planning to make a public announcement about Amanda at the IPO party, then that's where we make our own announcement. About the fraud, about the affair, about everything he's done. I thought about the IPO launch party, scheduled for New Year's Eve at the Grand Hyatt. It would be the culmination of 5 years of work, attended by investors, clients, media, and everyone important in Denver's business community. Grayson would be expecting his moment of triumph. Can you get us access to the guest list? I asked. Honey, I designed the event space. I can get us access to whatever we need. Then that's where we end this, I said. Publicly, completely, and in front of everyone who matters. The next morning brought a call from Raina with news that changed everything. Elena, we have a problem, she said without preamble. Grayson's lawyers filed an emergency motion to freeze all marital assets. They're claiming you've been transferring money to unauthorized accounts. That's impossible. I haven't touched any of our accounts, I know, but they're arguing that your access to business accounts constitutes a security risk, and they want a judge to lock down everything until the divorce is finalized. I felt a familiar surge of panic, the same helpless feeling I'd experienced when Grayson had first handed me those divorce papers. But this time, instead of freezing, I got angry. Can they do that? They can try, but I've been busy too. I filed our own emergency motion this morning, demanding immediate access to all business records and requesting a full forensic audit. I also included the evidence of document fraud we discovered. What happens now? Now, we have a hearing tomorrow morning. Both sides will present their arguments, and the judge will decide who gets access to what while the divorce proceedings continue. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside the office building that housed Grayson's company, our company, and tried to reconcile the gleaming glass structure with the betrayal I now understood had been planned within its walls. The sign by the entrance read Bellamy Sustainable Solutions, with no mention of the partner who had helped create the algorithms that made their software possible. My phone rang. Verity's name appeared on the screen. Elena, I need to see you. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on 17th Street? Is everything okay? Just meet me. And Elena, come alone. The coffee shop was crowded with the after-work crowd, but I spotted Verity immediately in a corner booth, her purple hair like a beacon in the sea of business casual. She looked nervous, which was unusual for someone who typically projected an aura of rebellious confidence. I've been thinking about what you said, she began without preamble. About Grayson trying to steal the company, and I think I know how he's planning to do it. What do you mean? I had dinner with our parents last night. They're furious about the Christmas situation, but Dad mentioned something interesting. Grayson has been asking about transferring company ownership to a family trust. A family trust? It's a way to protect assets from divorce proceedings. If the company is owned by a trust instead of individuals, then technically it's not marital property. That can be divided. The implications hit me immediately. But if he transfers ownership after we're married, wouldn't that still be considered marital assets? Not if he can prove the transfer was always planned, or if he can backdate the documentation to before your marriage. That would be fraud. Elena, my brother has been committing fraud for months. What's one more crime at this point? She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a text conversation. Look at this. He sent this to Dad yesterday. The message read, trust documents ready for signature. Need to move quickly before court hearing. We'll explain everything after New Year's. Verity, this proves he's planning to hide assets. We need to get this to Rain immediately. There's something else, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I think Dad is having second thoughts about helping him. What do you mean? Robert Bellamy has spent 40 years building a reputation for ethical business practices. Having a son who commits fraud isn't good for the family brand. I think if he understood the full scope of what Grayson has done, he might be willing to help us instead. The idea of Robert Bellamy as an ally seemed impossible. He'd always been polite but distant with me, clearly viewing me as an outsider who didn't quite belong in their world. Why would he help me? Because despite his flaws, Dad respects competence and honesty. And because having his son exposed as a fraud would be worse for the family reputation than having his daughter-in-law fight back against criminal behavior. That evening, I met with Reina to prepare for the next day's hearing. Her office was lit with the harsh fluorescent lights of late-night legal work, and she looked like a general preparing for battle. I've been reviewing the emergency motions, she said, spreading documents across her conference table. Grayson's lawyers are claiming that you pose a flight risk and that you've been acting erratically since receiving the divorce papers. Erratically? How? According to their filing, you've been accessing business accounts without authorization, making unauthorized copies of confidential documents, and threatening to damage the company's reputation, all of which is true, I said. Except for the unauthorized part. Those are my accounts too, and those documents represent my work. Exactly. But they're trying to paint a picture of an unstable ex-wife who's lashing out emotionally rather than a business partner protecting her legitimate interests. She handed me a thick folder. This is our response. We're not just defending against their motion, we're going on the attack. Fraud charges, demand for forensic accounting, request for criminal investigation of the forged documents. Will it work? That depends on the judge. But Elena, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow's hearing isn't just about access to accounts. It's about establishing the narrative for this entire divorce. Are you the vindictive ex-wife trying to destroy your husband's business? Or are you the defrauded partner fighting to reclaim what was stolen from you? What do I need to do? Be yourself. Be calm. Be professional. Be the competent engineer who helped build this company. Don't let them make you into an emotional stereotype. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hearing, about the judges who would decide my fate, about the years I'd spent accommodating myself into invisibility. Tomorrow, I would have to speak up for myself in a way I hadn't done in years, but more than that, I thought about the woman I used to be, the engineer who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd designed award-winning sustainable buildings, who'd never doubted her own competence until she'd started measuring herself against the impossible standards of being Mrs. Grayson Bellamy. Tomorrow, I would remember that woman. And I would make sure everyone else remembered her too. The hearing was scheduled for a.m. in Judge Patricia Hendricks' courtroom, a wood-paneled space that smelled like old books and fresh coffee. I arrived with Reina, both of us dressed for battle, her in a sharp navy suit that screamed expensive legal expertise, me in a conservative black dress that projected competence and reliability. Grayson sat at the opposing table with two lawyers I didn't recognize, both wearing the kind of bespoke suits that cost more than most people's cars. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who'd never doubted the outcome of any conflict in his life. He didn't look at me directly, but I caught him studying me peripherally, and I thought I saw something that might have been surprise. Maybe he'd expected the broken woman from Christmas dinner, not the composed professional sitting beside one of Denver's most feared divorce attorneys. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Hendricks entered. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse in the book. Grayson's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Charles Morrison, whom I recognized from the society pages, stood first. Your Honor, we're dealing with a situation where the respondent has been acting increasingly erratically since being served with divorce papers. She's accessed confidential business accounts, made unauthorized copies of proprietary documents, and threatened to damage our client's professional reputation out of personal vindictiveness. Morrison painted me as an unstable woman lashing out emotionally, someone whose access to business assets posed a genuine threat to a legitimate company's operations. He spoke with the practiced smoothness of someone who'd spent decades reducing complex human situations to legal soundbites. Then Reina stood up. Your Honor, what we're actually dealing with is a systematic fraud perpetrated by the petitioner against his own wife and business partner. Mr. Bellamy has forged documents, misrepresented legal agreements, and attempted to steal millions of dollars in assets that belong jointly to both parties. She presented our evidence methodically: the forged signatures, the timeline of deception, the social media evidence of his affair, the financial records showing unauthorized transfers. With each piece of evidence, I watched Morrison's confident expression begin to crack. Mrs. Ruiz isn't a vindictive ex-wife, Reina continued. She's a defrauded business partner who discovered that her husband has been planning to steal their company for over a year. The emergency motion before this court isn't about protecting legitimate business interests, it's about preventing Mrs. Ruiz from exposing Mr. Bellamy's criminal behavior. Judge Hendricks studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who understood the difference between marital drama and actual fraud. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 30 years on the bench. Mr. Morrison, these are serious allegations. Does your client deny forging Mrs. Ruiz's signature on these business documents? Morrison conferred quietly with Grayson before responding. Your Honor, there may have been some confusion about which documents Mrs. Ruiz signed and when, but any discrepancies were unintentional, Mr. Morrison. Judge Hendricks interrupted. I've seen a lot of unintentional signature discrepancies in my career. They usually involve drunk people signing bar tabs, not sophisticated business owners transferring millions of dollars in assets. She turned to Reina. Miss Gomez, what exactly are you requesting? Immediate forensic accounting of all marital and business assets, criminal investigation of the document fraud, and continued access for Mrs. Ruiz to all business accounts and records. Additionally, we're requesting that any asset transfers made in the past 12 months be frozen pending investigation. And Mr. Morrison, you're requesting that Mrs. Ruiz be barred from accessing business accounts and records, and that all discussions about the company's operations be conducted through legal counsel only. Judge Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the evidence spread across her desk. Finally, she looked up. Here's what's going to happen. I'm ordering an immediate forensic audit of all business and personal accounts held by both parties. I'm also referring the signature fraud allegations to the DA's Office for Criminal Investigation. Mrs. Ruiz will retain access to all business accounts and records, but any significant financial transactions must be approved by both parties or by court order. Morrison started to object, but she held up her hand. I'm not finished. Mr. Bellamy, if these fraud allegations prove accurate, you're looking at serious criminal charges. I suggest you cooperate fully with the investigation and think very carefully about any additional asset transfers you might be contemplating. As we left the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: validation. A federal judge had looked at the evidence and seen what I saw: not a vindictive ex-wife, but a victim of calculated fraud. That went better than I expected, Reina said as we walked to our cars. Judge Hendricks has a reputation for cutting through bullshit, and she clearly sees what Grayson is trying to do. What happens now? Now we prepare for the real fight. The forensic audit will take weeks, but in the meantime, we keep building our case. And Elena? She paused, studying my face. You did well in there. You looked like exactly what you are: a competent professional who's been systematically defrauded by her husband. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Beatrice. Bellamy. Elena dear, I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this afternoon. There are some things we should discuss. The request surprised me. Beatrice had been conspicuously silent since the Christmas disaster, and I'd assumed she was rallying around her son despite his behavior. We met at the Brown Palace Hotel, a bastion of old Denver money, where Beatrice clearly felt comfortable. She'd chosen a table in the corner of the lobby, positioned to see everyone who entered while maintaining privacy for conversation. Elena, she began without preamble, I owe you an apology for what happened on Christmas. Grayson's behavior was unacceptable, regardless of whatever marital difficulties you two might have been experiencing. I studied her face, trying to read the subtext. Beatrice Bellamy didn't apologize casually, and she certainly didn't criticize her children publicly. Thank you, I said carefully. That means a lot. However, she continued, I'm concerned about the direction this situation is taking. Legal battles can be so destructive for everyone involved. Beatrice, I didn't start this legal battle. Grayson did when he decided to steal the company I helped build. Yes, well, that's what I wanted to discuss. She paused to sip her tea, and I realized this was a negotiation, not a social call. The Bellamy family has a certain reputation to maintain. Having Grayson involved in a public scandal would be problematic. Problematic for whom? For everyone, but particularly for Grayson, whose career could be destroyed by criminal charges. I leaned back in my chair, finally understanding why she'd called this meeting. Beatrice, are you asking me to drop the fraud charges? I'm asking you to consider what would be best for everyone involved. Perhaps there's a way to resolve this quietly, without destroying reputations or careers. You mean without holding Grayson accountable for what he's done? I mean, without turning a family matter into a public spectacle. I looked around the elegant hotel lobby, at the expensive artwork and crystal chandeliers that represented everything the Bellamy family valued: appearance, tradition, the carefully maintained fiction that their money made them better than everyone else. Beatrice, I said finally, for 10 years, I've been trying to fit into your family's world. I've accommodated and adjusted and made myself smaller to make room for your son's ego. But I'm done with that. Grayson committed fraud, and he's going to face the consequences. Elena dear, I understand you're hurt. I'm not hurt. I'm angry. And I'm done protecting a man who's spent months planning to destroy my life. She studied me with new interest, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. You're quite different than I expected. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just weren't paying attention. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Beatrice did something I'd never seen her do before. She smiled with what looked like genuine respect. You know, she said thoughtfully, I think I may have underestimated you. Most people do. Perhaps that's been our mistake. She leaned forward slightly. Elena, if you're determined to pursue this legal action, then I think we should discuss how to manage the situation in a way that serves everyone's interests. What do you mean? I mean that the Bellamy family has considerable resources and influence. If those resources were directed toward supporting you rather than protecting Grayson, the outcome might be quite different than he's expecting. The offer hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I was still processing. Beatrice Bellamy, the woman who'd spent a decade making me feel like an outsider, was proposing an alliance. Why would you help me? Because reputation matters more than family loyalty when family loyalty requires covering up criminal behavior. And because, she paused, studying my face, I think you might be exactly the kind of strong woman this family needs. 2 days later, Raina called with an opportunity that felt like a gift from the universe. Grayson's lawyers want to meet, she said. They're calling it a settlement discussion, but I think they're nervous about the criminal investigation. What kind of settlement? That's what we're going to find out. But Elena, this could be our chance to get him on record making admissions about the fraud. I want to wire you for the meeting. Is that legal? In Colorado, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. You're consenting, so we're fine legally. The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon at Morrison's law firm, a gleaming downtown tower that reeked of old money and newer ambition. Raina had coached me extensively on what to say, and more importantly, what not to say. Let him talk, she'd advised. Ask open-ended questions and let his ego do the work. Men like Grayson love to explain why they're smarter than everyone else. I arrived at Morrison's office wearing a simple gray dress and the kind of defeated expression that had become second nature over the past few months. But underneath my practiced accommodation, the wire Raina had fitted felt like armor. Grayson was already seated in the conference room when I entered, looking relaxed and confident in a navy suit I'd helped him choose months ago. Morrison sat beside him, along with another lawyer I didn't recognize. Elena, Grayson said, standing to greet me with the kind of formal politeness reserved for business acquaintances. Thank you for coming. I know this has been difficult for both of us. I took the seat across from him, noting how he positioned himself with his back to the window, the light creating a halo effect that photographers loved. Even in a legal negotiation, he was thinking about his image. I wanted to talk, he continued, because I think we can resolve this without making things more complicated than they need to be. What do you mean? I mean the criminal investigation, the forensic auditing, all of this legal drama. It's not good for either of us, Elena. You'll spend years in court, and I'll lose the company we built together. The irony of his concern for the company we built together wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. What are you proposing? Morrison slid a folder across the table. A revised settlement offer, significantly more generous than the original divorce filing. I opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. The offer included a lump sum payment of $2 million, continued health insurance for 2 years, and a confidentiality agreement that would prevent me from discussing any aspects of our marriage or business partnership. $2 million, I said, letting surprise color my voice. That's very generous. I want to be fair, Grayson said. Despite everything that's happened, I respect what you contributed to our partnership. What I contributed, I repeated slowly. Can you be more specific about that? He shifted slightly in his chair, the first sign that his confidence might be slipping. Well, you provided support during the early years. Emotional support, administrative help. It was valuable. Administrative help? Elena, you know I've always appreciated your organizational skills. The way you managed our files, kept track of deadlines, handled the day-to-day details so I could focus on the big picture. I felt a surge of rage so pure it was almost physical. 5 years of algorithm development, client presentations, and strategic planning reduced to administrative help and organizational skills. What about the technical work? I asked. The software development? You helped with some of the initial coding, he said dismissively. But the core innovations, the intellectual property that makes the company valuable, that came from my vision, my expertise. Morrison shot him a warning look, but Grayson was too caught up in his own narrative to notice. Elena, I don't want to minimize your contributions, but we both know that the success of Bellamy Sustainable Solutions comes from my leadership and my relationships in the industry. You were supportive, but the company's value is based on work I did, the algorithms that power our software, I said carefully. Where did those come from? I developed them based on my architectural background and my understanding of sustainable design principles. You developed them? Yes, with some input from you, of course, but the fundamental innovations were mine. I glanced at Raina, who was taking notes with the focused intensity of someone documenting a confession. Morrison was looking increasingly uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that his client was walking into a trap. Grayson, I said, leaning forward slightly, what about the patents we filed? The ones with both our names on them? Those were filed jointly for legal reasons, he said impatiently. Tax benefits, intellectual property protection. But the actual innovations were my work, and the prenup modifications you had me sign? What were those about? Morrison started to interrupt, but Grayson waved him off. Elena, those documents were just updating our agreement to reflect the current reality of our business partnership, making it clear that the company's value comes from my work, not from joint contributions. So when you had me sign those papers in March, telling me they were insurance updates, you were actually transferring my ownership rights to yourself? I was clarifying ownership based on actual contributions rather than marital assumptions. Without telling me what I was signing, Elena, you never showed much interest in the business details. I handled the legal complexities so you didn't have to worry about them. Morrison was now actively trying to signal his client to stop talking. But Grayson was committed to his narrative of benevolent leadership and supportive but secondary wife. What about Amanda? I asked quietly. What about her? How long have you been planning to replace me with her? Elena, that's not Amanda, has nothing to do with our business relationship. But she's been accompanying you to industry events, taking my place at charity functions, meeting with clients. Amanda is a colleague. Her presence at business events was professional, not personal. Professional, I repeated. Is that why you helped her move to Denver? Why you set up her email account on your business server? Why you've been paying for her apartment and her car? For the first time, Grayson looked genuinely rattled. How do you, Elena? You've been spying on me. I've been reviewing our business accounts, which is my right as a business partner, regardless of what those fraudulent documents you tricked me into signing might say. Morrison finally managed to get Grayson's attention. Grayson, I think we should take a break. No, Grayson said, his voice taking on the edge I'd learned to recognize as his anger breaking through his careful control. Elena, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. I'm offering you a generous settlement for a supportive role in building the company. Take the money and move on with your life. A supportive role, I said, not a partnership, not recognition for the technical work I actually did, just appreciation for being a good wife who stayed out of the way. You were a good wife, he said, and for a moment, his voice softened with what sounded like genuine affection. But Elena, you were never a true business partner. You helped, you supported, but the vision, the leadership, the work that created value, that was mine. I stood up, and every man in the room automatically stood as well, a gesture of politeness that felt absurd under the circumstances. Thank you for clarifying that, I said. I think I understand the situation much better now, so you'll consider the settlement offer? I'll consider everything you've told me today, very carefully. As I left Morrison's office, I felt the weight of the wire under my dress like a secret weapon. Grayson had just spent 45 minutes systematically confessing to fraud, theft, and perjury while dismissing my contributions with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never seen me as an equal partner. But more than that, he'd revealed something. I needed to understand. He genuinely believed his own lies. He'd convinced himself that I'd been nothing more than administrative support, that my technical contributions were minimal, that his success was entirely self-made. It was going to make destroying him so much more satisfying. That evening, Raina and I listened to the recording in her office, her expression growing more pleased with each damning admission. Elena, she said when the recording ended, your husband just confessed to multiple felonies while simultaneously perjuring himself about your contributions to the business. This isn't just evidence, this is a complete legal victory. What happens now? Now we prepare for the final phase. The IPO party is in 5 days, and after what we just recorded, I think it's time to let Grayson know exactly what happens when someone tries to steal from the wrong woman. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland that screamed expensive taste and unlimited budget. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in silver and white, while floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Denver's glittering skyline as the backdrop for what was supposed to be Grayson's moment of triumph. I stood in the hotel's marble lobby at 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the official start time, wearing a dress that had taken me 3 days to find. It was midnight blue silk that moved like water, cut to showcase confidence rather than desperation, accessorized with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry I owned that had nothing to do with Grayson's money or taste. You look like a woman who's about to change the world, Nico said, appearing beside me in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's rent. Are you ready for this? I've been ready for this my entire marriage, I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. I just didn't know it until now. Verity emerged from the ladies' room, her purple hair swept into an elegant updo that somehow made her look both rebellious and sophisticated. She was carrying a small silver clutch that I knew contained copies of the most damning evidence we'd gathered. Beatrice just texted, she said. She's positioned near the media table, and she's confirmed that Amanda is here as Grayson's guest. Apparently, he introduced her to the financial press as his business partner and companion. Perfect, I said. The more public his relationship with her, the more devastating this will be. Raina approached from the elevators, looking like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller in her black evening gown and what I'd learned to recognize as her victory expression. The audio equipment is set up, she said quietly. When you're ready to play the recording, just give me the signal. And Elena? She paused, studying my face. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. I looked around the lobby, at the wealthy guests flowing into the ballroom, at the photographers and reporters positioned to capture Grayson's big moment. Tomorrow, this would all be in the newspapers and business journals. Tomorrow, everyone in Denver's business community would know exactly who Grayson Bellamy really was. He destroyed my life on Christmas morning in front of both our families, I said. Tonight, I returned the favor. The ballroom was already half full when we entered, with clusters of guests admiring the decorations while servers circulated with champagne and canapés. I recognized many faces from the society pages and business journals, investors, entrepreneurs, media personalities, and the kind of wealthy socialites who attended events like this to see and be seen. Grayson was holding court near the stage, surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits who hung on his every word. He looked exactly like the successful tech entrepreneur he'd always wanted to be, confident, charismatic, completely in control of his narrative. Amanda stood beside him, wearing a red dress that was beautiful but somehow inappropriate for the occasion, like she was trying too hard to make an impression. She looked nervous, occasionally touching Grayson's arm for reassurance, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but trying to play the part of the successful man's companion. She has no idea what's about to happen, Nico observed quietly. Part of me almost feels sorry for her. She's as much a victim of his lies as I was, I said. The difference is, she'll have a chance to walk away and rebuild her life. I'm going to make sure of it. For the first hour, I circulated through the crowd like any other guest, accepting condolences about my difficult divorce and politely deflecting questions about my future plans. Several people mentioned seeing my name in the business press as a co-founder of the company, which told me that Grayson hadn't been entirely successful in erasing my contributions from the public record. Beatrice found me near the bar, immaculate in champagne-colored silk that probably cost more than my car. Elena, dear, you look lovely, she said with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Are you ready for what's about to happen? More ready than I've ever been for anything. Good. Because Robert is here, and he's brought several board members from the family foundation. When this all comes out, they'll be positioned to distance the family name from Grayson's actions. The calculation in her voice was breathtaking, but I found myself respecting it. Beatrice Bellamy had spent decades protecting her family's reputation, and she wasn't about to let her son's criminal behavior destroy what she'd built. At 9 o'clock, Grayson stepped up to the microphone at the front of the ballroom. The crowd quieted, turning their attention to the man of the hour. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began, his voice carrying the confident authority that had first attracted me to him in college. 5 years ago, I had a vision for revolutionizing sustainable architecture through technology. Tonight we're celebrating the realization of that vision. He spoke about innovation and leadership, about the challenges of building a company from nothing and the satisfaction of seeing dreams become reality. He thanked his investors, his employees, his business partners. He mentioned the IPO that would make Bellamy Sustainable Solutions a publicly traded company with a valuation of over $50 million. He did not mention the wife who had helped build the algorithms that made the company possible. I also want to acknowledge someone very special, Grayson continued, gesturing toward Amanda. Amanda Fletcher has been an invaluable partner in preparing for this launch, and I'm excited to announce that she'll be joining the company as our new Director of Strategic Communications. The applause was polite but confused. Amanda smiled nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the public attention, but trying to play her assigned role. In fact, Grayson said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, I have another announcement to make. Amanda has agreed to marry me. The ballroom erupted in surprised applause and congratulatory cheers. Amanda looked genuinely shocked, like this wasn't something they'd discussed beforehand. Grayson pulled her closer to the microphone, where she managed a few stammering words about being honored and excited for the future. I felt Nico's hand on my arm, steadying me as the full scope of Grayson's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just planned to steal the company, he'd planned to debut his new life, complete with a new fiancé, at the moment of his greatest professional triumph. But as I watched him bask in the applause, surrounded by the success he'd built on stolen work and fraudulent documents, I felt something that surprised me, pity. Because he had no idea what was about to happen, I caught Raina's eye across the room and nodded. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, stepping up to the microphone as the applause for Grayson's announcement began to fade. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something I need to share with all of you. The room went silent with the sudden tension. That comes when a planned event takes an unexpected turn. Grayson's face shifted from confusion to alarm as he realized I was about to speak publicly about our divorce. For those who don't know me, I'm Elena Ruiz, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. Until recently, I was Elena Ruiz Bellamy, Grayson's wife and business partner. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't typical dinner party conversation, and everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen. Grayson just told you about his vision for this company, about building something from nothing through innovation and leadership. I wanted to share a different perspective on that story. Elena, Grayson said, moving toward the microphone. This isn't the time or place, actually. This is exactly the time and place, I replied, not moving away from the microphone. Because this is supposed to be a celebration of Bellamy Sustainable Solutions, and I think everyone should understand what this company really represents. I gestured to Raina, who began distributing folders to the tables nearest the stage. Each folder contained copies of the most damning evidence we'd gathered: the forged documents, the timeline of deception, selected excerpts from the recorded confession. 5 years ago, Grayson and I started this company together, I continued. Not just as husband and wife, but as equal partners. I wrote the algorithms that power our software. I developed the sustainable design protocols that differentiate us from our competitors. I spent countless hours building relationships with clients, refining our business model, and turning our shared vision into reality. The room was completely silent now, with guests scanning the documents they'd been handed while trying to process what they were hearing. But according to the divorce papers Grayson served me on Christmas morning in front of both our families, I made no meaningful contributions to this company. According to his legal filings, I was nothing more than administrative support, someone who helped with filing and scheduling while he did the real work. Amanda was staring at Grayson with growing horror, clearly beginning to understand that the man she'd agreed to marry had been lying to her about fundamental aspects of his life. What's particularly interesting, I continued, is that Grayson has been planning this version of events for over a year. He's been systematically erasing my contributions from business documents, transferring assets out of joint accounts, and preparing to steal the company we built together. Grayson finally found his voice. Elena, you're clearly upset about our divorce, but this is neither appropriate nor accurate. Let me play something for you, I interrupted, signaling to Raina again. This is a recording from a settlement meeting we had 2 days ago. I think it will clarify exactly how accurate my statements are. The ballroom's sound system crackled to life, and Grayson's voice filled the space with crystal clarity. Elena, you know, I've always appreciated your organizational skills. The way you managed our files, kept track of deadlines, handled the day-to-day details so I could focus on the big picture. What about the technical work? The software development? You helped with some of the initial coding, but the core innovations, the intellectual property that makes the company valuable that came from my vision, my expertise. The recording continued, playing Grayson's dismissive comments about my contributions and his casual admission that he'd tricked me into signing documents I didn't understand. With each revelation, the energy in the room shifted from confusion to shock to outright disgust, when his voice admitted to transferring my ownership rights without my knowledge, calling it clarifying ownership based on actual contributions, rather than marital assumptions. Several people in the audience audibly gasped. That's enough, Grayson said, moving toward the sound equipment, but Verity and Nico had positioned themselves to block his access. The recording played his final, damning statement. Elena, you were never a true business partner. You helped. You supported. But the vision, the leadership, the work that created value, that was mine. When the audio stopped, the silence in the ballroom was deafening. 200 of Denver's most influential business leaders had just heard Grayson Bellamy confess to multiple felonies while casually dismissing the woman who had helped build his success. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I'd just done, you've just heard the man you're celebrating tonight admit to fraud, theft, and perjury. The IPO you're here to support is based on stolen intellectual property and forged documents. Amanda stepped away from Grayson, her face pale with shock and betrayal. You told me you were divorced, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom. You said Elena was your ex-wife who was trying to claim credit for work she didn't do. Amanda, I can explain. You said she was unstable, Amanda continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. You said she was trying to destroy your company out of spite. But she's not your ex-wife, is she? You're still married, and you've been lying to both of us. The crowd was beginning to react now, with conversations breaking out at tables throughout the ballroom. I could see phones being pulled out, reporters taking notes, business leaders distancing themselves from what was clearly about to become a major scandal. I want to be very clear about something, I said, reclaiming the microphone. This isn't about a bitter divorce or personal revenge. This is about holding someone accountable for criminal fraud. The documents you've been given include evidence that Grayson has stolen intellectual property, forged legal documents, and attempted to defraud his business partner out of millions of dollars. Morrison, Grayson's lawyer, was pushing through the crowd toward the stage, clearly trying to do damage control. But it was too late. The story was already out, witnessed by too many people to contain or spin. The Denver District Attorney's office is currently investigating these allegations, I continued. The company's assets have been frozen pending a forensic audit, and the IPO that was supposed to launch tonight has been suspended by the SEC pending resolution of the fraud investigation. That last statement sent a ripple of shock through the investment community in attendance. Several people immediately began making phone calls, presumably to lawyers or financial advisors. Grayson finally managed to reach the microphone area, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Elena, this is defamation. It's not defamation when it's true, Raina said, stepping up beside me. And it's not defamation when we have documented evidence of every claim we've made. She held up a thick folder of documents. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Raina Gomez, Mrs. Ruiz's attorney. What you've heard tonight represents a fraction of the evidence we've gathered showing systematic fraud perpetrated by Mr. Bellamy against his wife and business partner, The crowd was beginning to thin as guests started leaving, clearly uncomfortable with being associated with what was rapidly becoming a legal and public relations disaster. But the reporters remained, along with several prominent business leaders who seemed fascinated by the spectacle. "Grayson," I said, looking directly at my husband for the first time that evening, "you served me divorce papers on Christmas morning because you thought I was weak. You assumed I would quietly disappear and let you steal everything we built together. You were wrong." I stepped down from the stage, walking past him without another word. As I reached the ballroom entrance, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me: raised voices, urgent phone conversations, the sound of a carefully planned evening dissolving into scandal. Nico, Verity, and Raina followed me into the lobby, where we paused to catch our breath and process what had just happened. "Elena," Raina said, "you realize there's no going back from this, right? You've just destroyed his reputation, his business, and his engagement in front of the entire Denver business community." "Good," I said. "He destroyed my life in front of our families. Now he knows how it feels." 6 weeks later, I sat in my new office, a converted loft in Denver's River North Art District, reviewing the morning's news coverage. The Colorado Business Journal had run a feature story about the rise and fall of Bellamy Sustainable Solutions, complete with a timeline of Grayson's fraud and a sidebar about the woman who fought back. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Boardroom: How Elena Ruiz Reclaimed Her Company and Her Voice." Raina knocked on my office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression she'd maintained since the DA had announced Grayson's indictment on 12 felony counts. "Good morning, CEO Ruiz," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "How does it feel to be running your own company?" "Terrifying and exhilarating," I admitted. I'd forgotten what it felt like to make decisions without considering how they might affect someone else's ego. The forensic audit had concluded exactly what we'd expected: that my contributions to the company's development had been systematic and essential, while Grayson's role had been primarily promotional. The algorithms I'd developed were the foundation of our competitive advantage, and the client relationships I'd built represented over 60% of our revenue. When the assets were divided, I'd ended up with controlling interest in the company, which I'd immediately renamed Ruiz Sustainable Solutions. Grayson, meanwhile, was facing 12 felony charges and professional disgrace that would likely end his career in the technology industry. "Any word on the plea negotiations?" I asked. "Morrison called yesterday. They're willing to accept responsibility for the fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and full restitution. Grayson would do 18 months in minimum security prison and pay triple damages for the assets he attempted to steal. And Amanda? She's cooperating fully with the investigation. Turns out she kept records of every lie he told her, every false promise he made. Her testimony about his deception will be crucial if this goes to trial." Amanda Fletcher had become an unexpected ally in the weeks following the IPO disaster. Once she'd understood the scope of Grayson's manipulation, she'd provided detailed information about his planning and preparation for the fraud. Her testimony had been particularly damaging because it showed his systematic deception extended beyond our marriage to every significant relationship in his life. "She stopped by yesterday," I said. "She's thinking about starting her own consulting firm." "Good for her. She deserves a chance to rebuild her life without Grayson's lies." Nico appeared in my doorway, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing his trademark grin. "Ladies, I bring good news. The Times just called. They want to do a feature story about women fighting back against financial fraud in divorce cases. National coverage. National coverage. They're calling it the Elena Effect, apparently. You've inspired other women to fight back when their husbands try to steal their assets." The idea that my story might help other women was both humbling and empowering. I'd never intended to become a symbol of anything. I'd just been trying to reclaim what was rightfully mine. "There's something else," Nico continued. Verity called. "The Bellamy Family Foundation wants to make a substantial donation to support women's financial literacy and legal aid programs." Beatrice's idea? According to Verity, Robert's actually. Apparently, having a son exposed as a fraud has made him very interested in supporting ethical business practices. My phone rang, interrupting our celebration. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "Mija," Les said when I answered. "I just saw the news story. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. You know what your abuela used to say? Las mujeres fuertes no nacen, se hacen. Strong women aren't born, they're made." I remember. You were always strong, Elena. You just forgot for a while. But now you remember. After I hung up, I walked to the window of my new office and looked out at the Denver skyline. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who'd lost herself in someone else's dreams, who'd spent a decade accommodating herself into invisibility. Now I was the CEO of a successful technology company, a role model for women fighting financial fraud, and someone who'd learned the difference between being kind and being weak. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a message that made me smile. Miss Ruiz, my name is Sarah Chen. My husband just served me with divorce papers that include suspicious IP transfers. I heard about your story. Can you recommend a lawyer? I forwarded the message to Reina, then typed back, Sarah, you've reached exactly the right person. Help is on T. Elena Ruiz went on to build a multi-million-dollar consulting firm specializing in protecting women's assets during divorce proceedings. Grayson Bellamy served 15 months in federal prison and was permanently barred from working in the financial services industry. Amanda Fletcher founded a successful communications firm and became an advocate for fraud victims. The Elena effect became shorthand in legal circles for women who fight back against financial manipulation in divorce cases. As of this writing, Elena's story has inspired over 200 women to challenge fraudulent divorce settlements, recovering more than $50 million in stolen assets. She never remarried, but she did frame her original engineering degree and hang it in her office, where it serves as a daily reminder that some things are too valuable to give up, even for love. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.